Hello students, this is Mrs. Kleins, and we are going to get started with a new unit of video notes covering cells and cellular energy. So just a couple of quick reminders before we get started. Remember that you can pause this video at any time to jot anything down that you see on the screen or you hear. Make sure you are writing down examples that I provide, and also take note of any questions that you have so we can address those the next time I see you in class. So let's get started. We are going to talk first about cells. So the different types of cells, their structures, and their functions. It is important to remember that cells are the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. For example, blood cells, nerve cells, and bone cells. Each of these cells has all of the characteristics of living things. Cells themselves are made up of mostly water, and the remaining are composed of molecules, such as proteins made of amino acids, nucleic acids made of nucleotides, carbohydrates made of monosaccharides, lipids made of fatty acid and glycerol, and a few other items. The purpose of a cell is to organize and hold materials, whether that be of a single-celled or unicellular organism, or an organism that is made up of many cells, like we are, a multicellular organism. Regardless, each cell has a specific function or role to play. In the 19th century, several scientists collaborated and developed what is now known as the cell theory. One particular scientist, whose last name was Schwann, determined through his research that all animals were made up of cells, while Schleiden, another scientist living at the same time, determined that all plants were made up of cells. And a few decades later, another scientist by the name of Rudolf Virchow concluded that all cells come from other living cells, meaning cells reproduce. From Schwann, Schleiden, and Virchow, we now have the cell theory that still stands today and proclaims that 1. All living things are made up of cells, 2. Cells are the basic unit of all living things, and 3. All cells come from other cells. So let's talk about the two different classifications of cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, as you can see here on the size scale, boxed in red. These cells do have a cell membrane. They have ribosomes, which synthesize proteins or make proteins, and they have DNA, which carries the genetic code of that cell. So, with the cell membrane, they have a boundary. With the ribosomes, they have protein synthesis, and with DNA, they have genetic information. However, they do not have membrane-bound organelles, including chloroplasts and mitochondria. They also do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. So prokaryotic cells will have one thing in common. They are all unicellular organisms. Examples would be bacteria cells. They still complete all of the necessary functions for life. So they do still utilize energy, they do still grow and develop, and they also reproduce. But these are the smallest and most simple of all cell types. Eukaryotic cells are the other type of cell, and these are a little bit more complex. They are larger cells. They do have membrane-bound organelles. So inside of the cells, you'll find things like mitochondria, which help with energy synthesis. There's lysosomes that contain enzymes for digestion or breaking down damaged cell parts. There's chloroplasts that plants use to make food, and Golgi bodies, which aid in protein synthesis, as well as packaging up these proteins so they can be used in other parts of the body. Eukaryotic cells also have a true nucleus that is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Eukaryotic cells can be unicellular organisms, like protists, or they could be multicellular, like plants and animals. They are much larger than prokaryotic cells, as they contain more of these organelles in their cytoplasm, and they are very complex in comparison. Examples of eukaryotic organisms that contain eukaryotic cells would be plants, animals, protists, and fungi. You can see all of the organelles found inside of both the plant cell and the animal cell seen on your screen. Proteins or protein structures, as you can see here, are larger macromolecules by comparison to the others. Proteins assemble with some genetic information to make these structures called viruses. But bacteria, which are prokaryotic cells, are here on our scale, which is about 1 micrometer in size. Next, we have organelles that are contained inside eukaryotic cells, and they're about the same size as bacteria, a little bit larger, okay, on our scale. So this is just to give you some context to the relative sizes and complexities of these structures that we've been talking about in this video. For the second half of these notes, let's jump right into one of the characteristics of life that all living things require energy. This is going to be the meat of this unit. So just to recap, energy is the ability to do work, and the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which help to study or explain the flow and transformation of energy through an ecosystem or through a body or any system as a whole, states that in the first law, energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can change forms. The second law states that energy cannot be changed without the loss of some usable energy. A lot of times, that lost energy is in the form of heat that cannot be brought back into a system. Important types of energy to be familiar with are light energy, or solar energy would be an example of light energy, chemical energy, which is stored within the bonds of chemicals, so those could be covalent or ionic bonds, and mechanical energy, which is the energy to do work, and that can be stored as potential energy or kinetic energy, which is the energy of motion. You can see this in the animation here. This is a protein strand that's walking up another protein strand, and it is kind of how our muscles contract. Now, how do organisms get their energy? This should be a review for us now. Autotrophs are your producers, and they're able to make their own food or energy source using light energy and other chemicals from the environment. Heterotrophs are your consumers, and they must consume other organisms for an energy source. And then we have chemoautotrophs, which consume inorganic matter for energy. We tend to see chemoautotrophs in more extreme environments where there is no light. Now, tying this into biochemistry, metabolism is going to include all of the chemical reactions that occur within a cell, and there are thousands of chemical reactions. A metabolic cycle is unique in that in a metabolic cycle, it is almost like a chain reaction, where the products of one reaction get used as reactants for the next. There are two types of metabolic reactions that we are going to get familiar with. These may be new to you: anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. First, anabolic reactions are those that store energy in the chemical bonds of larger molecules. An example of an anabolic reaction would be photosynthesis. In this case, the sun's light energy, or solar energy, is used as a reactant or energy source to drive photosynthesis, and larger chemicals such as glucose are made or synthesized using smaller chemicals such as water and carbon dioxide from the environment. So in this case, chemical reactants will be the smaller molecules, again, carbon dioxide and water, and the products, glucose, are going to be the larger molecules. That glucose is actually storing some of that light energy in chemical bonds. So it's transforming energy from one form, light energy, into chemical, and this can later be used by the cell as an energy source. As we remember, glucose is a carbohydrate, and carbohydrates are a quick source of energy for a cell. Another pattern to take note of is that anabolic reactions tend to be endothermic, which means they store energy and they don't release it. Conversely, catabolic reactions are like the opposite of an anabolic reaction. They do release energy by breaking down large molecules into smaller molecules. So an example that we will soon discuss is cellular respiration. During cellular respiration, organic molecules, which are the products from photosynthesis, mainly glucose, are broken down to release energy that the cell can use to do work. So again, in this type of reaction, larger molecules, like glucose, can be broken down into smaller molecules, including carbon dioxide and water. The breaking of these chemical bonds releases stored energy, and these tend to be exothermic reactions, because as we know, when energy is released, we tend to feel heat as heat leaves the reaction.